Okay, I am really thrilled to introduce Dr. Dustin Bindreiff to you. Dustin has a long career in education, everything from a teacher's aide to a special education coordinator to providing technical assistance to schools. I can say that I think his passion is working with underserved students, including and maybe especially those who have experienced trauma and repeated school failure. Working with these students has made him very aware of the need for behavioral and mental health supports for students. Dustin currently serves as a lead policy manual consultant for this California School Board Association. He trains educators on topics such as PBIS, growth mindset, and everything related to special education. Belonging is Dustin's first book. Welcome, and I'll hand it over to you, Dustin.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. And thank you guys for being here in such busy times. I have deep compassion for the work you guys are doing. And I really hope this time will give you some things to think about and be useful. My goal for this time is to share with you a simplified description of our brain, how belonging shapes student thinking, why belonging has become a critical issue, and preview some things we can do to help build community. I will be moving pretty quickly through the research today and will not be able to share as much research and application as I would like. But fortunately, if you like what you hear today and it's worthwhile, there's a great deal more research and application in the book. So I think we'll just get started here. I wanted to start with just a real introductory question to hear from you guys in the chat. This question: what % of your students' day would you estimate is spent worrying about what others think about them? This could be peers, teachers, parents, social media. There you go. I thought that would be a good introduction. And you see, it's a lot. You guys can see the numbers there, 95, 50, 75. And again, and that's why I'm glad you guys make time, and it shows you're aware of what your students needs. And we'll talk more about why that's so relevant in their brain, but it's obviously on their mind. And for me, I spent many years as a behavior analyst and consultant. And in those roles, I visited hundreds of classrooms, yet I actually know very little about teaching. I spent all this time watching students, trying to understand why they behave the way they do, watching how they react to teacher directions, interact with their peers, approach assignments, and so forth. This experience taught me a great deal about the role of belonging, how relationships with peers and the teacher impact student behavior, learning, and achievement. The research is, it's been fun because the research around belonging has really blown up recently in the past few years as brain science has developed and allowed us to understand the brain more. And belonging is very much a basic need, similar to the need for food and shelter. When we don't get this need met, we are less healthy, less happy, and less able to learn. Belonging is deeply wired into our brain and psychology. Historically, our survival was directly connected to our community. Alone on the savannah, we were weak and vulnerable. Together, we were formidable and able to conquer everything the wild could throw at us. As a result, our brain is virtually constantly analyzing our social standing. And that's kind of what you guys touched on at the start. What other people think of us and how we can become more popular. When we are rejected, our brain goes into high alert because belonging has long been directly connected to our survival. And in the primitive areas of our brain, isolation has been wired into our brain to equal death. This is why being rejected can hurt so deeply. And in today's world, being rejected is likely the most common threat we face, and it triggers our fight or flight response. If you consider the threat of rejection in social media, you can see why so many students crave a sense of safety now more than ever. Just real quickly, if you think back to being in middle or high school for a moment, walking in the hallways and feeling others look at and laugh or judge you, being dumped by a crush, or the fear you felt when a teacher criticized you, recall those feelings, those experiences, and how they felt in the body. So when we talk about belonging, it's important we really understand how it feels, the lived experience. So many of these experiences we can still recall decades later, and often these experiences greatly shaped our life, both the experiences of rejection and those moments when a teacher, parent, mentor gave us encouraging words at our weakest moments. My career is centered around student behavior, and for over 20 years, I've watched and tried to understand the rise of mental illness and problem behavior until it has reached the point it is at today. Over that time, mental illness has become commonplace, to the point that in 2021, the Surgeon General declared an epidemic of mental illness in kids. Observing and working with kids with behavior and mental illness, one gets to observe the impact of failure, alienation, and rejection on young people. Many of these students I have worked with and observed have been rejected by peers, are regularly laughed at and bullied. In class, many of these students experience high rates of failure or have largely given up on themselves. These experiences have important implications in understanding their behavior and learning difficulties. We process the pains of social rejection through the same neural pathways as we do physical pain. So often these students are coping with repeated social blows from inside and outside of school, while also bracing themselves for future blows. Oh, I think I got to read a little more. Sorry. If for a moment, excuse me, sorry. I had an example here, but I messed it up now. Working with these students taught me the value of doing things we are not good at. We can talk about how it's okay to make mistakes, but the felt experience of public failure or being an outsider is not logical. It has to be felt. For me, this was doing yoga. I was working at a PBIS coordinator, visiting schools and observing classrooms all day. Then I would load up my towels and water and go to 90 minutes of hot yoga. With the class dominated with young, thin, flexible yogis, I stuck out like a sore thumb. I was different than the other students, not good at the postures, and overwhelmed with heat and sweat. Additionally, as a pretty restless person, having to stay in one place and not talk for 90 minutes was way outside of my comfort zone. So over time, it was really fascinating to watch my own behavior and compare it to the kids I would observe all day. In yoga, I was sensitive to the glances of others in the room. While the people were nice, I was sure it was fake because they didn't really want people like me there. I worried about how close others put their yoga mat or why they didn't. If I stumbled, I felt like others were laughing at me. I would get down on myself, wondering why I wasn't getting any better, and constantly felt uncomfortable. Yet the rest of the class seemed to be in a Zen state. When I would get frustrated and tired, there were times I was just like a defiant kid. The teacher would say, sit down, I would stand up. Then when she would say, stand up, I would sit down. So why, as a highly educated adult, was I behaving like a child in yoga class? As I mentioned, social rejection triggers our fight or flight response and causes us to operate from the more primitive reptilian parts of our brain. So being the outsider in yoga class had me thinking about all the wrong things. Rather than focusing on the exercises, I was worried about what everyone else thought about me. When we are alone or rejected, our brain is on high alert, focused on survival and scanning the environment for threats. In school, this can be why students may overreact to small or even unnoticed obstacles, or have trouble sitting still, not pay attention, and fidget. In contrast, when we feel a valued part of a team, our survival brain relaxes and we can access the most powerful part of the brain, the neocortex or executive functioning area of the brain. This is the powerful creative area of our brain. When students are using this area of the brain, they are able to wait and take turns because this area is responsible for self-control. Additionally, with the sense of safety, they are more able to slow down, be curious, make mistakes, and ask questions. Because belonging is so closely connected to our survival, our sense of belonging and safety plays a pivotal role in which of these brains students are using. So if we return to my yoga experience, I was going to these classes 6 days a week. So I obviously wanted to learn and be a part of the community. But because I was so terrified about not fitting in, not making mistakes, and not upsetting people, I interpreted efforts to welcome me to the community as disingenuous. I was afraid to talk with anyone and felt like the teachers didn't understand how hard I was trying. I was stuck in this lizard brain, defensive and emotional. The classroom is a highly public place. Raising our hand to say, I don't understand, in front of 30 of your peers and an evaluator is an act of great courage. And this is why most kids won't do it. When we are operating from our survival brain, our focus is on self-protection. In the classroom, our survival brain is on alert for danger. So when operating from this mindset, these are the types of behaviors you're likely to see. Then, after years of this, some students grow tired of trying to manage impressions and may act out to get out or distract and hijack the classroom. So one of the questions, I spent hours in classrooms watching struggling students wondering was, how do we get kids to try? How do we get them out of lizard brain, focused on impression management or other behaviors students do to avoid making mistakes? Admit they don't understand or ask for help. Please do. I see you guys are active in the chat. I got to relate. I got to catch up. But please do feel free to share. What other ways do you see students manage impressions in your classrooms? You know, I think the big idea of impression management, what you see like from a behavior perspective is, you see for the most part, they do nothing, right? They try to shut down. You're afraid of making mistakes. Yeah, I see social withdrawal. Yeah, making mistakes. That's a huge thing. Won't have time to talk about today, but I really enjoyed getting to share some of the research around mistakes in the book. Yeah, and I think get on their cell phone. Yeah. Yeah, it's where it's fascinating. It was great fun to get to observe so many classrooms is as teachers, you're managing 30 different personalities and how they compete or interact and trying to learn how to juggle that. It is no small feat. Argumentative. Yeah. Well, good. Yeah, I'm glad to see I wasn't the only one that had students that I felt like I couldn't connect with, and seeing these experiences. And I'm sure, the passionate teachers you guys are, you're often trying to find ways to connect and pull those kids in. So I think feel free to continue sharing, but I got to move along because I wanted to share so much with you guys. So the next idea is this creative area of our brain. So in contrast to our survival brain, there is the creative area of our brain. In many ways, the whole focus of school is the development of the creative brain. You see here, the critical 21st century skills that we're desiring to teach. I was recently reading a book by a neuroscience researcher, and he describes this area of the brain simply as intelligence. This is the problem-solving, creative, self-control area of our brain. In the classroom, when kids are using this part of their brain, they are asking questions, making mistakes, patiently waiting, taking turns, taking chances, and showing creativity. In short, they are engaged. We are all constantly going back and forth between these two different areas of our brain, the survival brain and the creative brain. Yet we tend to spend most of our day operating from survival brain. And so our goal in school is to help kids develop their creative brain. So while our brain is the most powerful computer in the world, it has its limitations. And one of the biggest limitations of our brain is that it will only hold 5 to 9 bits of information in working memory at any moment. So in class, when students spend their working memory, what students spend their working memory on directly impacts what they can retain. The more of their attention that is on survival, impression management, and what others are thinking, the less attention and working memory they have to problem solve, be curious, or ask questions. When our students feel alienated and are working from their lizard brain, they are spending their bits of working memory on peer comments, trying to calm themselves, or wondering what will happen if they get another question wrong, and so forth. And so this leaves them little working memory left to actually focus on the lesson. In terms of brain functioning, survival trumps curiosity. When we're running from a lion, this is not a time to be curious, patient, explore, or take chances. By default, our brain will spend our precious bits of working memory scanning the environment for threats. Survival brain is the gatekeeper we have to get permission from to access intelligence. So the question we as teachers have to figure out is, how do we get past kids' survival brain, that survival brain, or the lizard brain? And belonging is one of the primary levers shaping which of these two minds students are using. When they are worried about being judged, feeling alienated, and so forth, they focus on that impression management we talked about earlier. In contrast, when they feel safe, valued, and needed, they are able to access executive functioning and engage in the learning behaviors that makes teaching fun. Returning to my yoga experience, I eventually found a studio and a teacher that fit my anxious ways, and I was able to settle in, and I did learn a lot about my body, heal some injuries, and gain some insight into controlling my lizard brain. So I want to stop here see if there are any questions. I've covered a lot at this point. First of all, I hope I introduced to you the idea that belonging is a basic need. Second, I wanted to describe in a simplified way 2 dominant brain mindsets. And third, explain how a sense of belonging shapes brain functioning. So I would love to take a moment and hear from you guys a little bit. Can one overpower the other as the child gets older? So one brain overpower the other? The lizard brain virtually always wins. Survival, again, survival trumps curiosity. So that becomes the challenge, right? As long as kids don't feel safe, they're going to be focused on that impression management, on what's happening around them, and less willing to do those learning behaviors. Yes, Deborah, how can teachers help students feel like they belong? I'm going to take a couple more minutes, and then we'll dive into some of the things I talk about in the book. And you guys as teachers, you guys are the experts on this and do this every day. That's an interesting comment from Kim, that so maybe kids are a little more willing to be vulnerable behind a screen. And I guess that is certainly a positive. And then we see the negative side and sometimes in social media. But that's a great point. And maybe that's something to build on. How much does the lizard brain affect math learning? Well, again, both, trauma is certainly one of the big, I read a lot, I'm currently writing some chapters on trauma, and that's the idea, right? Trauma, is very similar. It causes you to get stuck in this lizard brain. You become hyper vigilant on threats. So in terms of math learning, it kind of the main idea is, one, it limits how much working memory the students have to problem solve. how many pieces of a story problem or a complex equation can they hold in their brain as they try to solve it. And then it also tends to be, more their focus is on what's around them. And in terms of math, especially, a lot of students have some anxieties or limiting beliefs about their ability to learn math. And what you also see, again, similar to other subjects, is that willingness to take a chance and make a mistake. And I think that's what can really limit students. And I feel like as a teacher, why for me, engagement is always the measure. If kids are trying and taking chances, making mistakes, then it's my responsibility to make sure they're learning and growing because they're doing their part. In your opinion, does seeking therapy treat the lizard brain? I mean, there's a lot of different types of therapy. I know it's a main goal in trauma-based therapy, and increasingly awareness of that is to help students understand their brain and understand what's going on in their body and learn to understand those things. What are some things teachers can do to help students feel less anxious and confident as they participate in class? We touched on mistakes, how we approach mistakes as a class. We saw being vulnerable, building relationships, shared experiences. I think I'm assuming you guys being here, you're probably some of the most effective teachers at your school sites, and you know how to build relationships, and finding ways to do that is really the foundation of learning. Yeah, please do feel free to share more of your ideas, because again, to me, you guys are the experts on your students, and so you can share what has worked as well as me. And you guys have a lot of valuable experiences in that. You guys are doing this every day. So next, I wanted to make a shift to share research suggesting that increasingly this basic need to belong is not being met. A lot of this research comes from Harvard professor Robert Putnam, and he studies social capital and has detailed a steady and growing decline in communities since the late 1960s. He described it as a cultural shift from cooperation and community toward competition and individuality. One way to think of it is as a shift from we to me. Brene Brown describes it as a disconnection crisis. Most recently, Johann Hari's book, Lost Connection, is a great resource for those wanting to better understand how the decline of community is impacting our mental health. And one thing that jumps out to me, right, most of this data is all pre-COVID. So I can't help but wonder, especially like looking at that second statistic, what that might look like 13 years later. And one key idea here, you see in the news, a lot of what's happening now is being blamed on COVID, rightfully so. But it's important we remember this has been happening, the decline of community has been happening for a long time. And I think, we as teachers have seen that increasingly. Putnam's work details the toll a lack of community takes on a society as a whole. As he explains, social capital makes citizens happier and healthier. It reduces crime, improves academic achievement, and allows for more effective run governments and economic productivity. So the decline of community also has important implications on our systems, not just on individuals. Systems rely on people and teamwork to be effective. In particular, Putnam detailed 5 ways our systems rely on community. First, with more cohesion between groups, collective problems can be more easily resolved. This has direct implications to student behavior and classroom management, where students seem increasingly unable to solve conflict. Similarly, departmental conflicts at the district level can create inconsistent and conflicting goals for school sites. The second major way is since in communities, people trust each other. there's less need to spend time and money enforcing contracts and laws. The decline of trust makes it harder for students to learn and almost certainly contributes to defiance issues, peer conflicts, and more. Third, social capital widens our awareness of our mutual connectivity, which tends to improve the quality of our civil and government institutions. In the classroom, when students are working toward a common goal rather than competing, more learning occurs. Conflicts are minimal and more material is covered. Fourth, a sense of belonging and community increases the amount of information exchanged and speeds up the flow of information. So again, when students are working together on a shared mission, they tend to share information and resources, allowing all students to grow. And then finally, social capital improves our health and happiness through both psychological and biological processes which require connection. And in short, happier and healthier students learn better. So what I wanted to really try to highlight here is this disconnection crisis is not just impacting individual students. It's making it harder to teach, to run a school, or to lead a group of kids. In the chat, feel free to share any insights. How is the disconnection crisis impacting your classroom systems? There's an example that really hit me last winter. I was teaching a group of students finishing up their teaching credential. And after years of online learning back in the classroom was overwhelming for many. Some would not show up due to mental illness. Others would leave class after 5 minutes. And after the first weeks, I became worried because these young adults were about to lead a room full of kids 6 hours a day and were totally uncomfortable talking to each other. So it really made me change my teaching style. Is it Marinfoot? That's a powerful statement. Social interactions between students is toxic. And that says a lot. And, I think, that's one thing, like as a behavior person, you see and was a driving force for trying to take a chance and write a book about how we can work on that. So when I changed my teaching practice, we had to just do icebreakers, just basic social interactions, getting them in the habit of having back and forth conversations, relying on icebreakers, activities, and group work. And it was really fun because, being young college students, they would roll their eyes and give me looks when I said, we're going to do this icebreaker activity. But they really opened up very quickly and they got excited and it became difficult to bring them back. Absolutely. There was one student in particular that couldn't last, was having some, identity issues, and he couldn't last in class more than 5 minutes. Another thing that really helped was talking with him and sharing. Being vulnerable is a great skill that if we want students to feel safe and comfortable being themselves, making mistakes, what have you, we have to do that as teachers, and that we set the standard, and that takes a lot of courage. And another thing I talk about a little in the book that is oftentimes you'll see in special ed classes, what have you, some almost direct instruction. This is how you talk to peers. This is how you make friends. Doing role play and practicing that. Deborah, I would love to hear more about how you feel like that's helped your students. Another thought I have, is it's a lot easier to build community and make relationships around icebreakers or social activities and things than it is around math or comma placement. So finding time in our busy day where we can have more authentic, natural interactions, maybe aside from scholastic topics. Yes, I hear you, TA. I think we all are. Especially I know my girlfriend will tell you I was a mess all weekend. This is out of my comfort zone. Yeah, I've always heard great things about the Boys Town stuff. I've never uh, looked in detail at it, but it's always something I always felt like, with the students I worked with would be a real great resource. Has it worked well for you, Deborah? Yeah, and it's a great point as well. Like the executive functioning of an area of our brain, it takes a lot of energy. Our brain uses about, I think it's like 20% of our calories go to brain function. And so it tires out very quickly. And having that high level focus, for 6 hours a day is not a realistic goal. So it's important, like somebody said here, finding those Maureen McCoy, finding those brain breaks, and yes, laughter. That there's a reason why they say that's the best medicine. Um, so yeah, thank you guys for sharing. I better move along here. I try to give you guys some solutions. So hopefully by this point, I've given you a bit more understanding on the fundamental role of belonging in behavior and learning. And oddly enough, even though we are more connected now than ever electronically, many students and families are not getting that basic need met. So while the COVID years definitely compounded feelings of alienation, they didn't start it. The decline of community was increasingly being felt before COVID. This slide highlights some of the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors researchers have associated with a lack of belonging. I do cover the role of belonging and mental health in greater detail in the book. And again, Johann Hari's book, Lost Connection, is a great read on the connection between community and mental health. This Time magazine cover detailing an epidemic of mental illness in youth was from 2016. And I'm sure now in 2023, many of us educators would love to go back to the good old days of 2016. I recently saw a May 2022 survey of school leaders. It compared the student behavior of students in May of 2022 with the pre-COVID years. The school leaders said physical attacks or fights between students had increased by 33%. Classroom disruptions from misconduct are up 56%. And student verbal abuse of teachers and staff is up 48%. And again, it's not like things were great before COVID. So we opened with the question, how much of the day do kids spend worrying about what others think? Now I would love to hear if you are seeing these effects of rejection in some of your students. In particular, if you take a minute and think of your most challenging student, how many of these symptoms might they display? How many of your students display 3 or more of these? Oh no, Marin says all. So yeah, it can be alarming. And again, I hate to, my intent here isn't to, be bad news or what have you, but I'm sure as you guys as passionate educators working with the students you work with, you see it, and it's an issue, and it's important we respect the toll it's taking on our students. So when we start to look at the disconnection crisis and mental illness epidemic in our classroom, we can begin to understand how the decline of community has left young people in a precarious place. Many kids are growing up stuck in lizard brain, focused on survival, and hypervigilant to threats. This can create anxiety and contribute to depression. And again, I talk more about that in the book and share some strategies and more research around that And there's increasingly a lot more awareness around it in broader literature as well. So it feels like something that really resonates with you guys, and I share your feelings. Real quickly, while the decline of community is likely impacting most students, it's almost certainly impacting some more than others. Students with disabilities, Black and Brown students, in many cases, female students, LGBTQ students, are all groups that are especially vulnerable to the harmful impacts of rejection and alienation. I am part of a work group here in California that helps schools with special education disproportionality and equity efforts. Major focus of our work is to help schools understand the lived experience of marginalized groups, to help stakeholders examine their school through a cultural lens. So when we focus on the lived experience of students with disabilities or oppressed groups, teaching becomes much more complex. These are some of the most frequently researched areas documenting the psychological toll prejudice and alienation can take on a person's psyche. And while I don't have time to go into as much detail about these as I'd like today, the research is covered in more detail in the book. Real quickly, cultural mistrust. The history of this country requires, as teachers, we as educators expect some skepticism from Black and Brown students, and we will have to earn their trust. Apathy. When we don't show kids how schools apply to their lives, they may begin to wonder why they are doing it. Stereotype threat. Stereotypes such as those Lisa Delpit highlighted in Multiplication is for White People can create anxiety when Black and Brown people are asked to do math, as an example. Similarly, low expectations. When girls hear things like they should focus on being popular or science is for boys, they are given the message that they aren't capable. And then learned helplessness. Students identified as learning disabled often have to combat the weight of that label while they try to learn. And then finally, last one really touched on in the book that was pretty eye-opening for me. Ambient belonging is the idea. Researchers were wanting to increase the interest of female students in majoring in computer sciences. And they found that altering the ambient social cues, such as posters and decorations, away from traditional computer science symbols, towards more open and neutral symbols, the interest in female students in computer science increased dramatically. And you can see more of the details in the book or in the research if you look up that term. So when we consider the lived experiences of some of our students, you can see that marginalized and alienated students will be inclined to be focused on self-protection and less able to focus on instruction. Well, thank you guys. It was great to try to give a voice to some of those students that often get overlooked or are not heard. So again, in sum, I wanted to quickly touch on three primary ways community impacts what is happening in the classroom. First, the decline of community undermines the ability of people to work together, placing extra burdens on our systems of support and complicates teaching. Second, it alters the brain functioning of students, contributing to problem behavior, low engagement, and mental illness. And then third, it takes a disproportionate toll on marginalized students and undermines equity efforts. Any quick questions or comments regarding how the disconnection crisis is impacting our classrooms and students before we move on? Maureen had a good point. Feeling anxiety and sadness is not always bad. It is a signal that something needs attention and needs to be the priority. Feelings are not bad. They are information. Oh, that's wonderfully said. I use an example often with really physically aggressive kids. Our goal is we end up trying to never make them mad, never make them angry. But like Maureen is saying, anger is a natural human emotion we all experience. And it's not anger that gets them in trouble, it's how they express it. And so a big goal with students like that for me is teaching them, one, that it's okay, and giving them skills and strategies to express it in a socially appropriate way so they get their needs met. And yeah, it's a very great point, Marie. It has a lot. I'm glad you raised it. Yeah, again, is it Marin again? So yeah, often in Western thought, we're very in the head, but a huge part of trauma therapy and what have you is helping kids reconnect with their body and learning to feel, and then learning that it's okay to feel that. We get afraid of our emotions. Many kids are afraid of feeling those things. And so, yes, and that's easier said than done. But that's a big part of the healing, is to help kids reconnect with what's going on inside of them and to feel okay with it. You also make a great point. A lot of kids feel that pressure to always, I think we all do, that we're supposed to be happy all the time or what have you. And so, yeah, there's a lot going on there. Thank you guys for saying that. So I want, Deborah asked about resilience. Can you address that, Dustin? Resilience comes from when we acknowledge them recovering from a difficult situation and trying again. Yeah, so I like Jody's one. So a big part of resilience, there's, let's do small resilience where you make a mistake in class. Do you give up? And then there's big resilience from, life traumas and what have you. So one, it's that community we create, and how do we as teachers respond to mistakes? Are they similar? Are they something to be avoided, or are those opportunities to learn and apply strategy? So that's more in the smaller sense. Again, I'm not a therapist, so trying to be careful here. But let's jump into it because I love it. And I'll show you in 2 slides my ideas. So next, maybe I just wanted to hear from you here. Let's do this one as we make that shift and try to discuss solutions and strategies. And what are some questions people ask themselves before doing a hard thing? In spite of our best efforts, often learning is not fun. The joys of learning comma placement or multiplying fractions pale in comparison to the fun of video games and social media. In fact, much of the school day is spent doing difficult, unpleasant, and boring tasks. Yet, often how students do these boring and difficult tasks has a great impact on their future. So this is why I wanted to take a moment and hear from you. What questions do you ask yourself before taking a challenge? What if I mess up? Should I really be doing this? Can I complete it? Is it worth my time? Is it worth it? So again, yes, we're calling cognitive functions and strategies. How do I move on after fail? Can I redo it? So again, one of the questions I often come back to is, how do we get kids to do hard things? And for me, hopefully you'll see your questions in these, but I've settled on sort of 3 central criteria that come up repeatedly in the research and my own experience. I call these 3 primary drivers of motivation the engagement equation. Because again, our goal in schools is to get kids using their creative brain, engaging in learning behaviors of asking questions, making mistakes, and taking chances. So I'm not the best with graphics, but here's how it's great in my head when I make them. So the idea of this graphic is, when we are presented with a challenge, we can either approach it as a threat, that if we fail, bad things will happen, or as an opportunity to show our skills, learn, and grow. Which of these approaches we take is based on how we answer these 3 questions. These are the three critical questions the lizard brain will require answers to before we are allowed to talk to the student's creative brain. First, do I belong? Will people laugh at me? Questions like, will people laugh at me? What will my friends say? Or will I be punished if I screw up? The second set, questions. Does this matter to me? I saw a lot of you guys say similar. I'm not going to work to do something hard if it's not important to me. Then finally, is there something I can do about it? Will it make a difference if I do my best, or am I just going to fail anyway? So, and then below each of these yes or no's, I listed popular terms in the research associated with how the question is answered that are discussed in more detail in the book. So you see here, when you talk about resilience, you're talking a lot about agency. Is there something I can do about it? So helping students understand the actions they can take. I saw some cognitive strategies, those things, giving them skills and tools to understand that they can do something. Do they just believe you're smart or not smart, right? The growth mindset idea. Or do they believe if I work hard and apply strategies, I will grow? And, that helplessness is really, that's a very, very troubling state. The idea in that learned helplessness research is that once we decide, there's nothing we can do about it, our brain shifts from, how do we solve the problem to how do I make the most of it? I'm stuck here. I can't do the math anyway. So how do I make the most of my time being in your class? And you can see how that could contribute to some behavior. Oh, I'm glad you like it, Paul. It was fun getting to make it. Yeah, Marin, I keep struggling with pronunciation of that. I apologize. But yeah, I think, and I think that's what a lot of some of the early mindset work was doing, was teaching kids about their brain and helping them understand that. Oh, good. Well, I'll keep stammering through it. Marin, thank you. I have more to say about it. So how students answer various forms of these questions is going to dictate the amount of energy they will put into a challenging task. When students are able to answer these questions positively, teaching is fun. Kids are asking questions, taking chances, trying their best, and helping each other. When they answer no to these questions, you tend to end up spending much of the school day on classroom management. Before taking on a challenge, kids need to feel a sense of belonging, agency, and meaning. So another reason I like these three questions is I use the acronym BAM, belonging, agency, and meaning. So that's what I am trying to empower the students I work with is I want them to feel like they are a valued part of a community. I want them to feel like if they work hard and take action, good things will happen. And I want them to have a reason for working hard. How did you create these questions? A lot of reading. Just a lot of time spent researching some of these and other areas that are kind of listed there, and just walking through it in my own head and just trying to understand myself in many ways. Okay, so I'm glad you guys like that. And yeah, that's a real central. So, a lot of times we want concrete strategies, but, you guys, teaching is very dynamic and it's very different for each of us. And we have to learn our personalities and how to do that, communicate and build those relationships with our students. I often get upset. Sometimes we act like teaching is, it's just add water. But teaching is an art, and you guys are artists, and it's learning how to, with your style and your personality and students, to how do you communicate messages of belonging. So, as you think about it, just ask yourself, what are ways I communicate belonging? And what are ways, how do I help students understand that hard work pays off, or that they can grow their brain? Or how do you help kids understand that there is something that it's important. How do you help them connect it to their lives? And we I shared some strategies in the book about how you can use questioning strategies. The real goal is, for example, rather than saying, and I think the goal I use in the book is an example, rather than having students write an essay, tell me about, this person, how this person overcame struggle in the book we just read. In contrast, our goal is to help students internalize that. So what are some times you've overcome struggle? What were things you did? How? So the more we can help them get their own story and help them write their own story about overcoming struggle and how it, kids will love, we all love talking about community. Usually our sense of purpose is going to be based in our community, in our belonging. So the Freedom Writers is helping them to get to tell that story of representing their community. Why is school important to them? One of the big things in the research around belonging is the idea of values affirmations, asking kids, why is school important to you? What is a time when, you failed you failed at something and then you kept trying at it and overcame that challenge. So helping them have that voice. I feel like I definitely better move along. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to go fast here. I like to think of a teacher's attention as the currency of the classroom. The teacher's attention decides who and what gets paid. So it becomes imperative we are aware of where our attention as teachers is going and who and what is getting paid. If our attention goes to misbehavior, then misbehavior is being paid and there's less value in behaving. So this graph is based on research from Princeton and Harvard, and they were analyzing how relationships are formed. The researchers concluded that when we meet someone new, our brain is analyzing that person along two dimensions: warmth and competence. Interestingly, the researchers highlight warmth as being the more important trait of the two. Unfortunately, with the natural focus of school on skill development, it can be tempting to focus on competence. And yet the ability to communicate warmth is a skill appreciated by wise teachers. Just a quick rhetorical question here that you guys will probably know, but feel free to chat about. What do wise teachers do when they know what do wise teachers know they must do when they realize they are being assigned a student with a history of problem behavior? Learn. Start with a clean state, build a connection. Yeah, in my experience, the wise teachers know with those students with a lot of failure and have had a lot of struggle, love the student, building that connection. If we fail to communicate warmth and do not convince students they are safe with us, they will not be able to turn off their lizard brain in our class. In this state, they are likely to experience two powerfully dangerous emotions: contempt or envy. If you have heard of John Gottman's research on contempt, you know its predictive power in divorce. You probably know this feeling is a problem. Gottman and his team were able to predict future divorce of couples with 90% accuracy simply by observing the presence of a 1/100th of a second expression of contempt. Similarly, envy can have dangerous powers. Researchers have found that envy can lead people to take pleasure in the suffering of others. As a behavior analyst, I often hear teachers say about particularly difficult kids that they seem to take pleasure in hijacking the learning environment. And so could it be that for some of our students, the classroom is creating those feelings of envy? That maybe they're jealous, other kids get all the attention and have all the success, and so they want to take it out on others. And then real quickly, I really got to wrap up, but in many ways, what makes a great teacher is a million things. I was recently given a handout recommending at least 25 different research-based strategies teachers should do to provide effective, inclusive instruction. As sound and research-based as these recommendations are, it can get overwhelming as a busy teacher. I always try to simplify things. And when I first heard the description of exceptional teachers as warm demanders, I knew that captured the essence of what makes a great teacher. Researchers describe culturally responsive teaching practices as a warm, demanding teaching style. And I love what Lisa Delpit wrote about it. She explained, warm demanders expect a great deal of their students, convince them of their own brilliance, and help them to reach their potential in a disciplined and structured environment. She concluded that it is the quality of relationship that allows a teacher to push for excellence. Many of our children of color don't learn from a teacher as much as for a teacher. They don't want to disappoint a teacher who they feel believes in them. So yeah, I think that's a great summary. And similarly, the National Research Council concluded that teachers who produce the best outcomes combine a caring and supportive environment with a focus on learning and high expectations. And I talked about that a lot more in the book. Lisa Delpit, I think it was from Multiplication is for White People was the name of the book. So I skipped that. And so here, real quick summary, these are some of the other strategies to talk about in the book. I know I covered a lot today, and I was not able to talk as much about solutions as I would have liked. But these are some of the strategies that you can read about more in the book, and maybe we can find ways to go into more depth in the future. My goal for today was to really make the case for community and belonging, to share with you how belonging impacts students' thinking and behavior. I hope, in conclusion, I hope as we talked, you often felt, of course, I know all this and do this stuff all the time, because building community is something great teachers have always done. And then just finally, I want to thank you guys for all the work you do. Teaching can be a thankless job, and it's harder now than ever. And I hope the book can provide you some resources and help you make a case for community. So I think, Jessica, should I open it up for a few questions or?
And yes, normally we would have some time here for Q&A, but I think, Dustin, you did a great job covering everything that came up in the chat already. But if you do have any questions for Dustin that didn't get answered today, feel free to send us your questions at info@corwin.com, and we'll get those answered for you. But yeah, thank you again, Dustin, and thank you everyone who joined us today. And have a great week. Thank you all.
Thanks, Dustin.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. My pleasure.